All right, time to go in depth. Today, Governor Spencer Cox signed 12 bills in a ceremony timed to take place while the nation focused on the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota. Now, that case was a catalyst to push for police reforms nationwide. Representative Angela Romero of Salt Lake City was the sponsor behind 3 of those bills. Now, 2 are about open information. House Bill, or HB 264, says a police officer must submit a written report anytime they point a gun or a taser at a person. HB 84 tells police departments they have to give information on use of force to the State Bureau of Criminal Identification, and that data has to comply with FBI standards. And then the third bill is a little different. HB 162 is about yearly training for officers in 3 important aspects of their jobs. First, mental health and other crisis intervention. Second, techniques for controlling someone during an arrest. Now that really brings to mind George Floyd. And third, also, de-escalation. So Representative Romero joins us to talk about these reforms. Representative, such an important discussion going on, and I'm wondering if you could start off by just telling us a little bit about your thoughts on the big picture. George Floyd, what happened yesterday, police reform, and what this moment in history means to you.
Yeah, with the verdict yesterday, I was shocked, actually, and I called Representative Haaland and I debriefed with her, and then I felt a sense of relief, because for so long when we've talked about police shootings, and even when we've had video, usually a peace officer gets off and nothing ever happens. And so that's where you see the frustration with the community. And I think the unique thing about George Floyd and the murder of George Floyd is that it was caught on video. But I think more importantly is, I think at the time and the climate, people could connect. They saw his murderer on his neck, and he's crying for his mother. Yeah. And there were people there that felt helpless and they couldn't do anything. So I think that ignited this movement that we've been seeing this past summer and until today. And I think you'll continue to see that. I think people were just frustrated and they were tired. And so one of the things that we decided to do as the Quad Caucus, so that's the ethnic racial minorities in the state legislature, is we wanted to make sure that we were asking for peaceful protest, but we also wanted to create change. And so for the past year, we've been meeting with law enforcement, different community activists, civics groups, and that's where the three of the bills that I were highlighted today by the governor came into fruition.
You know, Representative, it strikes me in thinking about your bills, specifically those 2 about sharing information. You know, there was a callousness to what Chauvin was doing that suggests to me that that might not influence him. But there were, along with helpless bystanders there were other officers who could have stepped in. Are you hoping that you're going to create a system of accountability where there's a culture of not just supporting whatever anybody does in a department?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that you had those other peace officers be bystanders, and you know, he was a superior to many of them. And so how do you break down those barriers? And so with these 2 particular bills, we need the data for transparency for the community, transparency for the media to report to the community, but also transparency for law enforcement. And what I hope to do with the data we're collecting from those 2 bills is to provide better training. So when we have the data, however you want to phrase that, we're able to look at that to help us as we move forward when we're training our peace officers. And studies have shown with the weapon pointing, and many law enforcement agencies already do this, but I wanted to set a standard for the entire state, that a peace officer is more inclined not to pull his weapon out or her weapon out when they have to document it. And so there's methods behind the legislation that I proposed before the legislature. And this was after working closely with community, with law enforcement. And as an elected official, my job is to find compromise. And do I think this is the end all be all? No, I think there's more we have to do. Yeah. But this is a starting point, and a starting point with these conversations.
One thing I've noticed when reporting on data, I look at the FBI data that comes out, and they for the FBI and for reporting to their database, it's voluntary, and there are parts of the state, there are departments that do not share that information, and I wonder what we miss, you know, off the Wasatch Front or on it from departments. Was that in mind, and did you look into that?
Yes, actually, the use of force was brought to me by the Department of Public Safety. I've worked with them for years on sexual assault, and so they brought this bill before me because after they already had a database, it was volunteer, but people weren't utilizing the database. So why do we have a database if we're not going to utilize it? And so that's why that bill was so critical, because it will provide us with the information we need as we move forward. It will be transparent for the community. And when people have questions and when does use of force happen, it'll be all documented there. And so the data is critical for all of us to be transparent again with the community, but also to give law enforcement the tools they need to do a better job.
And you've been talking with law enforcement people from different parts of the state and some of the highest officials since the George Floyd incident. We're hearing chiefs of police from around the country say this was the right decision. This really had to happen. Police need to be better than that, and for the most part, they are. We haven't heard from, you know, the higher ups in Utah policing. But did you hear that from them in talking to them this year about your efforts?
I heard that from majority of law enforcement that I was working with this prior to even the session. After the murder of George Floyd, Commissioner Anderson brought many of us together as elected officials with community organizations that he knew needed to be at the table with law enforcement. And we would have honest conversations, and we would talk about systemic racism. How does that tie into policing? We would talk about a variety of issues and what are some policies that we need to change. And so for me, I was impressed with the executive branch that they were willing to have those honest conversations. And we saw a little pushback in the legislature when anything had anything to do with racial justice. And so hopefully we don't get that pushback this next session, because there are some bills that didn't pass, that didn't get signed, didn't get a ceremony today with the governor that I think are really critical. And that's like when Representative Mark Wheatley ran 2 bills to form a commission to really look at bringing everyone together to have those conversations. And we'll basically still have that commission because that's what we were doing. But then also body cameras. When should that be released to the public, and should there be a timeline? So there are a variety of things that we're still working on and we'll still be meeting on as we move forward as a community and as elected officials and law enforcement coming together to find solutions. And are we always in agree? No, but we're actually having those honest conversations, and those conversations haven't always been comfortable for everyone, but everyone was willing to sit down and have those conversations, which was critical for the work we're doing.
Representative Angela Romero, we appreciate you taking some time. Look forward to hearing how all of those efforts go as things go forward. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.